I'm trying to determine the best load resistor to use for my powered channel 2 output for frequency. This particular FS230 has powered outputs, so I need to land between pins 8 and 9, which is common for 9 and plus for 8. Had this been a passive meter or externally powered, it would have been between 9 and 10, which is common and minus. On the FS230, I've simulated 10,000 hertz. And if you look at my oscilloscope, I have no pulse train. I'm going to put a 250 ohm resistor. And now take a look. At 5 volts per division, I have about 7.5 volts peak to peak. But if I increase my resistor to 1 kiloohms, at 5 volts per division, I now have 15 volts peak to peak. But look what happens when I set my resistance all the way up to 10 kiloohms. My pulse is barely recognizable and is very noisy, and the possibility that the meter reading the signal output would fail to make sense of it is pretty high. At 5 kiloohms, the signal is somewhat improved, but as you can see, it's still very noisy. At 2 kiloohms, I would say it is acceptable. At 1 kiloohm, I think not only is it acceptable, but there's still plenty of volts. So at 5 volts per division, that's 5, 10, 15 volts worth of signal. Again, back to 250 ohms. The signal is cleaner. However, peak to peak, you only get about a box and a half. I would say 7.5 volts. So this is just over what would be considered TTL, which is, I believe, 5 volts. So there you have it. If you're going to use longer cable lengths, stick with the higher resistances. If the cable lengths aren't going to be extremely long, you can get by with the lower resistance of, let's say, 250 ohms, and you'll still have about 7.5 volts.